while my daughter lay on the operating table, her brain swelling, her breath held only by a machine keeping her alive. My son-in-law was standing on a yacht in Newport, his left hand lifting a glass of champagne, his right arm around the waist of a girl in a red bikini, smiling as if mocking his wife's fragile life. And I knew that night there wasn't only someone fighting between life and death, but also someone already picturing a new life that no longer had a place for my daughter. If you've ever had the cruel truth collapse your trust in an instant, ever watched someone laugh while your loved one was in pain, ever realized you trusted the wrong person, leave a single. So I know you understand how devastating that feeling is. And if you want to follow a journey where justice doesn't come from screaming, but from silence and evidence, subscribe to hear the rest. Sometimes truth doesn't just save people. It exposes the wicked under the light. And I'm grateful you're here with me. The late October night in Portland had its own kind of cold. A cold that slipped through layers of clothing, crawled down collars, making the entire city beneath the steel bridge feel breathless. Fog drifted along the surface of the Willamette, brushing against Oregon Coast Regional Hospital, where harsh white neon lights slashed the eyes of anyone who had ever kept vigil for a loved one in the ICU. I, Henry Callahan, 62 years old, retired family court judge, had lived through countless long nights in courtrooms, but none drained me like this one. I braced a hand against the glass frame, staring up at the 6th floor where Lauren lay, feeling as if I were watching a burning house I couldn't run into. Car accident, the phrase the on-call doctor delivered as casually as an administrative announcement, but to me it was a blade. She has a severe traumatic brain injury, but it isn't hopeless. The on-call doctor, a young man with eyes shadowed by the weight of losses he'd seen, spoke slowly, each word measured. I nodded. Every judgment I'd ever delivered began in silence. And now I used that same silence to keep myself from collapsing. Lauren, my daughter, an emergency physician who had calmly revived children whose hearts had stopped on the spot, now lay there among wires, the green glow of the monitors blinking like the last flicker of hope. I wasn't allowed into the room after 9:00 p.m., but I'd spent years here as part of the hospital ethics board as a father. I knew which door led to the fire stairs. When the security guards switched shifts, and I knew a narrow back passage, the longtime staff called the old-timers route. I slipped in like a shadow. Room 614 appeared ahead. The steady beep of the monitor, the soft hiss of the ventilator, like a never-ending sigh. Lauren lay there, her face swollen, lips pale. The brown hair she tied back every morning now tangled across the pillow. I placed my hand over hers, and at that moment the monitor flickered. Not loud, not sudden, but a clear change. I looked up. Her heart rate rose from 58 to 64. "You can hear me, can't you, Lauren?" I didn't expect an answer, but the monitor jumped again. 66. A small signal, but enough for me to cling to life. I stood there for minutes, long enough to remember every old line Lauren used to say. "Dad, don't worry. I'm tougher than I look." No one is tougher than the night their child lies on the edge of life and death. I stepped back, pulled the blanket gently over her shoulders, and left the room the same way I'd entered. My footsteps felt like they dragged 40 years of judicial burden with them. But what chilled me wasn't the room. It was Mason's absence. In the 48 hours since Lauren was admitted, her husband hadn't appeared. At first, the nurse said he's at a medical conference in Seattle. But after years of handling divorces and betrayals, my instincts told me this wasn't just busy at a conference. And my instincts were right. As I sat in the waiting room, my phone buzzed. Instagram notification. I'm not the type to scroll social media, but the name caught my attention. Alyssa Tran, the community health worker who once handled billing. Someone Lauren had mentioned a few times, with a tone that wasn't exactly comfortable. I tapped the notification. The image that appeared stabbed a slab of ice straight into my chest. Alyssa standing on a yacht at Newport Marina. Sunset is turning the water gold. And her wearing the kind of tiny bikini a woman chooses only when she wants to be seen. leaning against the railing like posing for a cheap magazine. Champagne lifted, and at the edge of the photo, I saw a man's arm wearing the exact steel watch Mason wore at our family dinners. I couldn't be 100% sure, but the moment I saw it, my stomach twisted. The caption read, $51,000 well spent. New beginnings. I stared at that amount like a piece of incriminating evidence. Lauren lay in the ICU, while he, her husband, stood on a yacht with another woman, toasting to a new beginning. In my career, I'd seen every type of betrayal, but I'd never seen a man who could wrap his arm around another woman while waiting for his wife to die so he could collect insurance. I locked my phone. No rage, no curse, only a cold, sharp quiet. The quiet of someone who's seen too much darkness to be surprised anymore. In that silence, my phone buzzed again. A new message from Mason. Henry Callahan. We need to talk tomorrow. My office. I stared at that message for a long time. A meeting request, a confident tone, and a doorway to everything I didn't want to believe, but couldn't ignore anymore. Another night passed beneath the frozen steel bridge, and in that cold, I knew if Mason was hiding something, then tonight was the first crack where it would show. The Portland night has a very particular kind of rain. Not heavy, not loud, but persistent, as if it clings to you along an entire long walk, especially when stepping into the ICU, where rows of pale white lights make everyone look more exhausted than usual. I returned to the hospital at almost 0 inches the morning, the hour that, through 30 years as a judge, I called the hour of truth. People are tired, their guard is down, and the things they try to hide in daylight tend to surface in the dim glow of dawn. I stopped by the vending machine, a cup of weak black coffee, hot enough to keep my hands from shaking in the cold. When I walked back into the ICU hallway, I saw Nurse Veronica Hale. If there was anyone in this hospital I would trust instantly, it was Veronica. 21 years as an ICU nurse, long enough to have witnessed the ugliest things people can do to each other, yet still kind enough to protect patients without expecting any reward. She walked over, hair tied back neatly, eyes heavy as if she'd been awake all night, yet still sharp. She glanced around, then placed a hand on my arm. "Mr. Callahan, we need to talk in private." I recognized that tone, the tone of someone who knows she's stepping into danger, but still wants to do what's right. Veronica led me to a small medical supply room at the end of the hallway, closed the door, and checked the glass to ensure no one was looking. Only after she was certain did she speak quietly. "Something is wrong. Lauren's EMR record is locked." My heart halted. "Locked? What do you mean?" Veronica lowered her voice to almost a whisper. "Only Dr. Carter can access it." It took me seconds to process. In the American hospital system, a medical record, EMR, is only placed under restricted access in special cases, high-profile patients, legal cases, or situations where the hospital fears a leak to the media. And even under restrictions, several people still have access. The attending physician, charge nurses, department heads, coordinators. Only one person has access. "Impossible," I asked slowly, each word measured. "A resident cannot do that." "Correct." Veronica nodded immediately. "Correct. Fellows and residents don't have that authority. To lock an EMR, you have to request it to elevate access." "So, how did Mason do it?" She exhaled, pulling from her pocket a printed system notice she'd screenshotted before it disappeared from her dashboard. "He sent a request to it saying Lauren was a high-profile patient. Sensitive case requiring temporary confidentiality." I stared at the faint line of text. Reasonable if requested by a department chair. Not reasonable at all when the person requesting was the patient's husband. "And I believed him," I asked. Veronica shrugged. "It doesn't have the authority to judge. They just grant temporary access and report to management." And Mason sent the request during the night shift, when staffing is low and case-sensitive flags tend to get approved immediately. I took a long breath. People always think crimes begin with grand gestures. They don't. Sometimes they start with an email with the right subject line. Veronica continued. You need to see this. She opened her phone, pulled up a staff application. I saw the activity log of Lauren's EMR. Each line a timestamp. A glaring hole was visible instantly. A DNR order in pending review status. Not approved by the attending. Not fully signed, but already uploaded. I looked at the field reading, last modified by Dr. Mason Carter. This DNR. Who requested it? I asked. No one, Veronica answered immediately. No verbal order, no family request, no medical meeting, no legal justification. She paused as if swallowing her anger before speaking. It's fake. The small room suddenly felt darker, even though the lights were still on. It felt like someone had just driven a screw straight into my chest. I tried to keep my voice steady. Are you sure? Veronica looked straight into my eyes, the look of someone who has seen far too much filth hiding behind white coats. Mr. Henry, no doctor places a DNR on a patient who still shows neurological response. No one does that. Only someone who wants to pull the plug would. I said nothing. I took out my phone, switched to record mode, and aimed the camera at her screen. I recorded every log line, every signature, every timestamp. I was no longer a desperate father. I was back to being the man who had spent 30 years documenting the footprints of liars in a courtroom. Veronica didn't stop me. She simply stood still, letting me capture every detail. When I finished recording, she hesitated for a few seconds, then reached into her other pocket. I heard a soft click. She placed something small into my palm, a black USB drive. I would never give you this if I didn't trust you completely, she said. I opened the USB, not documents, not videos, a set of screenshot images, metadata from the EMR system, dates, times, access accounts, IP addresses, and at the exact timestamp, Mason uploaded the DNR. The system listed the login location as Newport Marina, guest Wi-Fi, where the $51,000 yacht was docked, where he and Alyssa were raising their glasses under the sunset. The coldness inside me then was no longer the pain from before. It was sharper, clearer, and frighteningly calm. Veronica looked at me, her voice slowing. I don't know what this is, but you need to be careful. Don't confront him alone. I looked at her and asked, why would you risk helping me this much? Veronica stayed silent for a few seconds, and then said softly, 11 years ago, I watched a young patient die because her doctor husband controlled the entire medical record. We suspected it, but there was no proof, and I've lived with that guilt for over a decade. I won't let history repeat itself. I'm only doing what I should have done years ago. I stepped back into the hallway, holding the USB tightly, as if gripping a fragment of truth dragged out from the dark. A battle had truly begun. And for the first time in many years, the silence inside me wasn't the helplessness of a father. It was the commitment of a man who had spent 30 years standing at the line between right and wrong. The fourth floor of the surgical wing was cold and metallic. White lights fell across the hallway in a way that made even my own footsteps sound slower. The fellowship office of the surgical department sat at the end of the corridor, a plaque reading fellowship room hanging above the frosted glass door. I stood in front of it for a few seconds, not to steady myself, but to observe an old habit of someone who spent a lifetime reading the body language of liars. I knocked inside. Mason's voice came out, calm even, so smooth it was almost oily. Come in. I pushed the door open. Mason Carter stood behind his desk. White coat, crisp dark blue tie, hair combed neatly. A perfect image of a promising surgeon, if one didn't know what he'd been doing for the past 48 hours. The moment he saw me, Mason instantly shifted his expression, resting a hand on his forehead, forcing a strained breath, as if in unbearable grief, his voice trembling. Dad, I'm really heartbroken. Lauren, she won't make it. You should prepare yourself. I stared at him, saying nothing for several seconds. He was used to people panicking when hearing those words. I was not. Finally, I asked, where were you? When was your wife taken into emergency surgery? Not a flicker of hesitation, a small smirk, one of those disrespectful half-smiles I'd seen many times in courtrooms from people who believe they were smarter than everyone else. A conference, then he added, as if to assert dominance. You don't understand. This is a medical matter, not something a retired judge can weigh in on. At this level, a phrase used by the young and foolish, usually by people showing off a status that is in reality hollow. I tilted my head slightly, my voice remaining calm to the point of discomfort. You sure? Mason folded his arms tighter, his chin lifted. About what? I stepped closer, lowered my voice, until each word dropped like a heavy object. About the DNR. A tiny jolt, barely a twitch, flickered through his eyes, but he covered it instantly with the reflex of someone accustomed to manipulating a room. What? DNR? I don't know what you're talking about. His voice feigned surprise. The kind of surprise with no weight. Surprise worn like a mask not felt. I didn't say I had the access logs. Didn't say I knew he logged into the EMR from Newport Marina. Didn't say Veronica had given me a USB full of metadata. Sometimes silence is a better hook than any question. Mason felt that silence, and instead of stepping back, he countered like someone who uses arrogance as armor. He wiped at the corner of his eye where there wasn't a single tear and said, Dad, don't make this harder. I'm a doctor. I know what's coming. Then he sneered. You're just a washed-up judge. I'm the surgeon of the future. In my mind, his words flashed like a neon sign. This is a man who believes a white coat can hide any sin. I looked at him for a few more seconds, not angry, not shocked, just observing. Then I asked the one question men like Mason hate the most. Are you sure everything you've done is clean? This time his face tightened for real. Not long, just a fraction of a second, but enough for me to see a hairline crack forming at the corner of his mouth. Are you threatening me? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm not threatening anyone. I answered lightly, as if talking about the weather. I'm just asking the question. The room tightened around us. Mason shifted his hand. A small reflex, but the reflex of someone more afraid of silence than of the truth. I turned and walked out. As the door opened, the hallway light spilled in, shining against the metal plaque reading, Fellowship Room. A cold light that made the room behind me grow strangely darker. In the frosted glass, I saw Mason's silhouette standing still, blurry, but with edges distorted, as if the mask he'd worn for so long was starting to slip. For the first time, I no longer saw him as my son-in-law. I saw something else, a man hiding something, and the fear of it flashing through him in that single fractured moment. Morning in Portland lay under a thick layer of mist that made the whole city look grayer than usual. I left the hospital after meeting Mason, but I didn't go home. People panic only when they don't know what to do. As for me, I've done this work for 30 years. When the truth starts to rot, the first step is to find someone who can drag into the light. I opened my contacts, scrolling down to a name I hadn't needed in 8 years. Eli Navarro, former FBI agent, Cybercrime and Digital Forensics Division, now a private investigator for cases the police don't have time or subtlety to handle. I called 2 rings, Mr. Callahan, a low, growly, familiar voice. I need you, Navarro. How soon? Today. 3 hours later, we were sitting in Navarro is less than Unk is greater than's office. A second-floor room on SWM Madison Street, a large window overlooking foot traffic below, the smell of coffee and old wood, blending like every independent investigative office I'd ever known. Navarro opened his laptop, the reflection on his glasses sharpening his eyes like blades. Your son-in-law's wife. Car accident, he said bluntly. Not an accident, I replied, handing him Veronica's USB. He plugged it in, his fingers moving fast, like he was playing piano. Within minutes, he had opened all the metadata. Where do you want to start? He asked. GPS, photo, metadata, system logs, every trace Mason touched. Navarro nodded and pulled up a large data table on the screen. I need a retainer. I took an envelope from my coat and placed it on the desk. $35,000. Not a small sum, but fair for exposing a man who knew exactly what he was hiding. Navarro didn't open the envelope. He just slid it aside the way professionals do. All right, let's begin. He connected the system to a GPS analysis tool. Within minutes, the map of Newport Marina appeared along with the yacht's route. You said your son-in-law was at a conference when He stopped correcting himself when his wife was in surgery. I stayed silent. He zoomed into the timestamp, 1742 to 2115. The yacht sat exactly where the Instagram photo was taken. He opened the metadata of the image. Alyssa. He read the file name, date, time, GPS, photographer. Everything matched the EMR logs Mason accessed. Then came the EMR. Navarro accessed an internal dashboard that I knew wasn't public. You don't need to know the source, he said when he saw me frown. The system logs appeared clearly. Access override. Dr. Mason Carter. Temporary elevated access. Approved at 0213 a.m. Navarro whistled softly. Smart. Choose the exact hour it is exhausted to request privilege elevation. I frowned. Smart? He answered instantly. Smart in the way someone preparing to commit a crime is smart. He turned the screen toward me. A log line appeared in red, flashing like blood. File uploaded. DNR pending. Review. PDF. Account martyr. IP address Newport Marina. Navarro leaned back, voice colder. See, Mr. Callahan. This isn't lying or carelessness. This is the footprint of deliberate fraud. But I knew that was only the surface. I slid another file across the table. Check Lauren's bank accounts. I suspect something. Navarro skimmed a few lines, then shook his head. This needs a specialist. He started a video call with an Asian woman in her late 40s. Hair in a tight bun, thin metal glasses, her expression sharp as a surgical blade. Beatrice, I need your eyes. Another fraud case, she said. Beatrice Kim, PhD in forensic finance. 12 years with the IRS Criminal Division. Now the only person who can look at a bank statement and know who's lying. 15 minutes later, she was there. She opened the data set, her fingers moving so fast I couldn't follow. 10 minutes later, she looked up. Small withdrawals repeated. All under reporting threshold, she read $410,000 over a few months. I saw Navarro freeze, split into 3 secondary accounts, routed through intermediaries, never over $9,800 per transfer. Avoiding CTR bank reports, Beatrice continued. Then she flipped to a page, stopping on a detail that froze the entire room. And this look on screen was a small transfer, $6,200, with the note, Cascadia Life. Beatrice looked up, her voice no longer neutral. Mr. Callahan, Cascadia Life processes only one type of money, death insurance. Navarro opened leaked emails from Mason's device, which he had just hacked. The subject lines appeared clearly. Inquiry regarding policy CL 89231. Life insurance coverage, $3.1 million. The second line. Request for double indemnity clause. Activation. Accidental death. $6.2 million. My body went still for several seconds, not because of the numbers, but because of what they meant. Beatrice spoke the final sentence, her voice falling like steel onto concrete. Mr. Callahan, this man didn't just betray your daughter. He's running a criminal operation. Navarro looked at me. No further explanation needed. I understood this war was no longer between Mason, and this was a war between a father and a man constructing an intricate machine built to kill. And I had never been more ready. Rain in Portland at night fell like scattered cold needles piercing through the ICU window glass. I had barely slept for half an hour in the waiting room when I heard hurried footsteps. Nurse Veronica and charge nurse Elena appeared at the doorway, both wearing scrubs damp with moisture as if they had just walked through a storm. Elena spoke first, her voice low and trembling, not from fear, but from anger. Mr. Callahan, we need to talk now. I stood up. What is it? Veronica glanced down the hallway to make sure no one was listening, then said plainly, "Mason showed up at 2:23 a.m. My heart staggered half a beat. What did he do? He requested medication to reduce cerebral swelling, Elena said. Dexamethasone? I asked. No. Veronica shook her head. What he was holding had no label. My whole body went cold. In the ICU, an unlabeled syringe is no different from a death curse, Elena continued. I asked for the supply source. The farm tech checked the system. There was no medication order. Not from the pharmacy, not from the attending physician, not through any medical directive. She gripped her clipboard tightly, which means it was illegal. Veronica spoke quietly, her voice as if afraid her words might become true. If we hadn't stopped him, I don't know what would have happened. I pressed my lips together again and again. He was accelerating step by step, beat by beat, like someone who had calculated everything ahead of time. I asked, "Is there camera footage?" Veronica answered immediately. "Full video can't be retrieved. Hospital-level security." She unlocked her phone, but I got a snapshot from the internal system. In the image, Mason is standing in Lauren's room, holding a syringe in the dark, the green light from the monitor reflecting on his face, making him look like someone who has lost all traces of humanity. "Where's the syringe?" I asked. "We sealed it and sent it to the lab," Elena replied. "When will we get results?" I asked, though I already knew. Veronica sighed. 24 to 36 hours. No faster. It's a regulation. Reasonable. This time, the system couldn't be manipulated as easily as the EMR. No one can rush toxicology testing. I followed them to room 314. The door opened, and the monitor continued its steady beeping like the breath of a warrior, lying still, but never surrendering. Lauren lay there, pale face, slightly swollen eyelids, her hair messy beneath the stabilizing bandages, but I still saw traces of the child who once tugged my sleeve, begging to go to the park, of the young woman who walked confidently into the first lecture hall of medical school. I placed my hand over hers, and just like the first time I entered the room, the monitor jumped. Veronica froze as the numbers climbed from 62 to 69, then 73. She looked at me, then at Lauren. "Do you see that?" I didn't take my eyes off my daughter's face. "She's reacting." Veronica swallowed, her voice thick, as if she didn't want to believe the words she was about to say. "She knows who was just here." I turned to her. Veronica looked straight at me, her eyes red from a whole day of holding herself together. "And she knows who is trying to kill her." The room felt like it had lost all its air. I stood there, still holding Lauren's hand, and understood that the battle was no longer about proving Mason was a traitor. This was a race against time, to keep my daughter alive long enough for the truth to surface. Portland's afternoon sank beneath a thin veil of rain, as if the weather itself knew something was about to be dragged into the light. I returned to Navarro's office, where the clacking of his keyboard sounded like the ticking countdown of a verdict. Eli didn't look up when I stepped in. He said only one sentence, his voice low and heavy like a stone dropped onto concrete. "I found the guy." The man Eli referred to was a forensic mechanic, a crash investigator who spent nearly 20 years with NHTSA. He had gone to the impound lot that morning, removing each bolt, examining every line of tubing, photographing every cut with a macro lens as if dissecting a metal corpse. When the report appeared on the screen, it felt like someone squeezed the air out of my chest. The brake system had been cut, not snapped, not leaking, not worn down, cut with a surgical tool. The incision was sharp, clean, and even, just like the line made on skin during a laparoscopic procedure. A shock ran down my spine. "Are you sure?" I asked, though I knew the answer. Eli turned the screen toward me, pointing at each section of the report. A small, sharp cutting blade consistent with a cutting tool was a small, extremely sharp knife, very similar to the kind of scalpel surgeons use in an operating room. The cut showed no vibration, not a saw, not pliers. Estimated time 12 to 24 hours before the crash. No animal tracks, no debris, Not accidental. Navarro said quietly, Mr. Callahan, this wasn't an accident. This was intentional. I said nothing, not because I doubted him, but because I had sensed it from the beginning. I just hadn't expected the precision to be this surgical. Eli continued as if the truth wasn't cruel enough. And this? He opened a video clip traffic camera. The night Lauren crashed. Her Subaru was moving at 23 to 26 miles an hour, very slow. No weaving, no erratic movement. And then the car went straight into a tree. No turn, no brake, no swerve. A direct collision from someone who had lost all control because there were no brakes left to press. I felt something inside me collapse in silence. Not pain. A hollow so deep it felt like my heart had stopped beating. Eli stood and moved to another desk. There's something else you need to see. He opened a file extracted from Melissa's phone. Messages pulled using forensic recovery software. One message made the entire room seem to sink. Alyssa, Mason, if she dies, we're free. No emoji, no teasing, no ambiguity. A sentence as naked and sharp as a knife laid against a spine. I stared at it for a long time. Each word hammered deeper. I heard the rain hitting the window, the hum of the ventilation fan, even the beating of my own heart. I stood straight and said, he didn't just want the money. Eli looked at me, silent. I continued, my voice low, but so sharp, even I barely recognized it. He wanted a new life without Lauren. In that cramped room, no one spoke again, because we both understood this was no longer a financial investigation. This was a murder plot engineered at its roots, and the fight to protect my daughter had officially stepped beyond the limits of the law. And when I understood that Lauren had not only been betrayed in the dark but hunted to the end, I knew it was time for the truth to leave the investigation room and be laid before the very people who once believed Mason was their colleague. That afternoon, the 9th floor of Portland General glowed with harsh white lights. The hospital board meeting room, usually reserved for discussions on ethics, budgets, and approvals for complex surgeries, rarely became a battlefield. But today, the air was thick, as if a storm were about to break. Board members, from the director to the chief of staff to the head of internal medicine, sat in a curved line. I stood at the end of the table saying nothing. Dr. Mason Carter sat across from me, his white coat still perfectly pressed, but his wrist trembling slightly. He didn't know what was waiting for him, or worse, he hoped he could still fool them all. That hope would die in this room. Dr. Patricia Hammond, chief of staff, tapped her pen lightly on the table. Let's begin. The door opened. Dr. Beatrice Kim walked in. Gray suit, cold expression, holding a file so thick the binder clips strained to keep it together. No one introduced her. No one asked questions. The weight of the truth she carried was enough to let everyone know this was not a routine meeting. She set the file down, opened the first page. Her voice rang out clear, steady, emotionless. I have completed the forensic audit requested by the hospital. The findings are severe. The room went dead silent. First, financial misconduct. Patient Lauren Callahan, legal wife of Dr. Carter, had a total of $410,000 withdrawn from her personal accounts over 5 months. All transactions were executed through a login device matching Dr. Carter's ID. Several doctors jerked their heads up. Others exhaled sharply. Mason swallowed hard. Beatrice turned the page. Second, EMR access logs. Dr. Carter requested elevated emergency access at 2:13 a.m., a time with no emergent medical indication. Using this access, he uploaded a DNR pending review file, without valid signatures, not approved, and executed from an IP address originating at Newport Marina. A young doctor couldn't stop himself from whispering, "New Newport Marina." He wasn't at the hospital. No one answered. They didn't need to. Beatrice continued. Third insurance calls. Over 6 weeks, doctor. Carter contacted Cascadia Life 14 times, asking about death benefit eligibility for a $3.1 million policy. including activation requirements for the double indemnity clause in the case of accidental death. Mason's hands turned white from how tightly he clenched them. She turned another page. The large screen lit up with the image of the yacht, sunset, the ocean, Alyssa in a tiny bikini. Mason smiling, a champagne glass, GPS metadata stamped beneath the photo. Eli stood up, his voice crisp. Image captured at 4:22 p.m. That was during the patient Lauren's first emergency surgery. The entire room turned toward Mason, eyes like blades. Nobody spoke, but everyone was thinking the same thing. This man was not a doctor. This was a monster wearing a white coat. Nurse Veronica stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. In 18 days, Dr. Carter visited his wife only twice, each time for less than 10 minutes. He repeatedly avoided her room, and not once did he hold her hand. An older doctor at the far end leaned forward on his chair, then let out a sentence that split the room open like thunder. In 28 years of practice, I've never seen a physician abandon his dying wife to go ride a yacht. A hiss, a sharp breath, a look of disbelief, a wave of outrage, spreading like fire, catching oil. People looked at one another, then back at Mason, as though staring at a new disease modern medicine did not want to name. Mason sat frozen, his face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. No defense, no excuse, no escape. Dr. Hammond closed the file, her voice so cold, even the floor seemed to shrink beneath it. Dr. Carter, effective immediately. You are suspended indefinitely. Your system access is revoked. Your case is being transferred to the Medical Ethics Committee, and this report will be forwarded to the State Medical Board before the end of the day. A decisive blow like a gavel of justice cracking against Mason's skull. All eyes fixed on him. No one stood with him. No one defended him. No one spoke on his behalf. No one saw him as a colleague anymore. He was nothing but a man exposed, dressed like a doctor, behaving like a criminal. I watched the scene, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, only with one certainty. The truth had finally been brought into the light before them all. After the hospital board meeting, where Mason had his mask ripped off in front of everyone, I left Portland General with the feeling that one door had slammed shut behind him, but another door, larger and far more dangerous, was opening before me. The courtroom. Any manipulator once cornered will strike back using the law. And Mason, with his medical degree and the white coat he had already stained, would absolutely do that. So I moved first. I met attorney Janet Crowley the next morning, a woman with neatly silvered hair, sharp eyes, trained over 25 years on liars, standing behind witness stands. Without many words, I placed all the evidence on her desk. The forensic report, EMR logs, insurance calls, yacht photos, the message, "If she dies, we're free," and the brake-cutting report. Janet read every page without rushing, without skipping, then said one sentence: "We fight on two fronts, protect Lauren and protect your granddaughter, Mia." She filed an emergency guardianship petition for Mia, 6 years old, Lauren's daughter. It's the strongest legal tool to stop Mason from accessing or manipulating the child. At the same time, Janet submitted an emergency protective order, requesting the court to restrict Mason from making any medical intervention decisions regarding Lauren, citing suspected intentional harm to the patient. Under Oregon law, an emergency guardianship hearing takes place within 48 to 72 hours after filing. No one can speed it up, and no one can delay it. The courtroom is not a place for emotion, only for evidence, and we had mountains of it. 3 days later, I stood in Multnomah County Court, courtroom number 4. The room was cold, the tension tight as a drawn violin string. Mason appeared with his attorney, a tall man with gelled hair in the face of someone who believed he could fight for his client's rights. But he didn't know Janet Crowley had dismantled men like him 20 years ago. The hearing opened with the judge's familiar statement: "We are here to review the emergency guardianship request and the EPO." Mason attacked immediately. "Your Honor, Mr. Callahan is elderly and mentally unstable. I'm concerned about his ability to care for a child or make proper medical decisions." Janet didn't change expression. She opened a black folder and pulled out a document stamped by the Oregon Health and Science University Neurology Clinic. "Your Honor, this is Mr. Callahan's cognitive assessment from 2 months ago. Results: 100% intact. No memory impairment. No cognitive decline. No signs of dementia or cognitive disorder." The judge looked up at me, at Mason, at the document. A long silence, long enough to hear the air conditioner hum. Mason's face changed first. He hadn't expected me to have a cognitive test on file, and even less expected Janet to find it immediately. The judge ruled on the first issue. "There is no basis for a claim of cognitive impairment. We proceed." Janet presented all evidence permitted for an emergency hearing. Mason, avoiding Lauren for 18 days. Unauthorized EMR access. Fake pending DNR. Insurance inquiries for a $3.1 million death policy. Yacht photo metadata. At 4:22 p.m., 19 minutes after the surgery started. The break-cutting report. Statements from Nurse Veronica and charge nurse Elena about the unlabeled syringe at 2:23 a.m. Mason countered each point, but he argued in confusion. No longer the confident surgeon he once pretended to be. The judge reread the file, pausing longest at tampering with medical safety. Then she nodded lightly and delivered a ruling both lawful and cold. The court grants temporary guardianship of the minor child, Mia Callahan, to Mr. Henry Callahan for 30 days. Additionally, the court issues an order prohibiting Dr. Mason Carter from interfering in any medical decision involving patient Lauren Callahan until the full hearing. Law clear, clean, uncompromising. In a single sentence, Mason lost control of Lauren and lost access to the child. In legal terms, this is called a structural freeze, freezing the power of the harmful party. When I stepped out of the courtroom, it felt like I could finally breathe after weeks submerged in darkness. Janet placed a hand on my shoulder. "You may return to the ICU now, legally, fully." I returned to the hospital that same afternoon. The ICU doors opened. The white lights washed over Lauren's face. I stepped closer, placed my hand on hers. As always, the monitor jumped. But this time, I whispered, "I'm here. And this time, no one has the right to stop me from protecting you anymore." That morning, Portland was still misted over. But what Dr. Beatrice Kim brought was not the chill of the weather. It was the storm of federal law. She called me Navarro into a small hospital conference room, closed the door, and placed a thick file on the table. Her first sentence alone was enough to change the entire game. "We are no longer at the hospital level. We've crossed into federal jurisdiction." I sat upright. Eli frowned. "Doctor?" Kim opened the file, her voice sharp as metal. "We have wire fraud. We have insurance fraud. We have computer fraud. And we have signs of obstruction of medical treatment." She pointed to each count. Wire fraud. The $410,000 withdrawn and cycled through 3 sub-accounts using Mason's device. Insurance fraud. 14 calls to Cascadia Life asking conditions to receive the $3.1 million death benefit and the $6.22 million double indemnity clause. Computer fraud. Unauthorized EMR access at 2:13 a.m. Illegal privilege escalation and uploading a fake pending DNR from an IP at Newport Marina. She spoke slowly, punctuating each word so no one could miss its weight. 3 federal offenses, proving just one, sends him to prison. After completing the forensic report, Dr. Kim signed it, encrypted the file, and sent it directly to the FBI Portland field office. No circling, no delay, no mercy. I checked the clock. 9:11 a.m. At 9:26 a.m., Eli's phone buzzed, an encrypted message from a former FBI agent in his old unit. We received the file, opening a case. Portland's wind rattled the glass. It felt like the entire city was holding its breath. 3 hours later, the FBI contacted the hospital. They requested full access to the ICU floor security cameras. EMR access logs, and all communication history with the insurance company. Once federal agents step in, no data belongs to the hospital anymore. They dig deeper than anyone ever has, and what they found chilled the room several degrees. A female agent, hair tied high, voice steady like she was reading charges, reported to Dr. Kim. We extracted emails from a secondary account Mason believed he had deleted. First email. Mason. Alyssa, the DNR needs to be pushed faster. If it's slow, we can't control the treatment. Second email. Alyssa. Mason. She's dragging it out. If this takes longer, your benefit will be affected. But that wasn't all. The FBI also recovered a file from Alyssa's iCloud titled DB Timeline Essex. Inside, each timestamp was laid out with clinical coldness, like a project plan: date of accident, date to projected estate, date to contact insurance, date to submit death certificate, date to receive payout. Dr. Kim slid the laptop toward me. Mr. Callahan, this wasn't a spontaneous conspiracy. This was a workflow. My throat tightened. A murder process, scheduled like a vacation itinerary. The FBI didn't wait. By late afternoon, an agent entered the hospital and handed Dr. Kim and me a printed document, affidavit for search warrant, a search warrant for Mason Carter's home. They wanted laptop, 2 phones, medical notebooks, storage devices, any items related to Lauren's finances, and specifically Mason's personal surgical instruments he brought home from the hospital. I didn't ask more. I didn't need to. When the FBI requests a warrant, it means they are certain beyond error. 6:42 p.m. I stood at the 9th floor window, overlooking the doctor's parking lot, and saw a black, unmarked SUV pulling into Lot C, the resident lot. The doors opened. 4 FBI agents stepped out. They intercepted Mason just as he walked out of the hospital, still wearing a trace of the arrogance he had in the morning. He froze when he saw the gold lettering on their jackets. He looked left, looked right, found no escape. One agent raised a document sealed in a transparent sleeve. Dr. Carter, we have a search warrant. Mason's face, drained white, so pale the yellow parking lot lights couldn't restore a shred of color. And for the first time since this began, I saw real fear in his eyes. The main lobby of Portland General is always noisy during shift change, but that evening, the sound felt electrically charged in the air. People waiting for test results, nurses just off duty, families gathered around the information desk, all suddenly stopped when 4 FBI agents and hospital security emerged from the East Corridor. In the middle of them was Dr. Mason Carter, still wearing his white coat, face pale as paper, his hands cuffed behind his back with metal restraints. A fall from heaven to the deepest pit, right in the place where he had once been considered the rising star of the surgical department. I stood in the corner of the lobby near the coffee counter, not hiding, but not approaching either. I simply watched, quiet. Let justice speak for me in the only language people like Mason understand, being exposed to light and a crowd. After a few steps, someone recognized him first. A young nurse shouted, her voice echoing across the lobby so loudly even she looked startled. "You left your dying wife to go yachting, Mason." Silence lasted barely half a second. Then the lobby exploded. A patient on crutches shook his head. A mother holding her child whispered, "My God, a doctor did that." 2 residents by the stairs stood up abruptly, staring at Mason like he was a stranger. And what shocked me most, 3 streamers near the gift shop had already raised their phones the moment the shout rang out. One was live streaming on TikTok, one on Instagram. The third held a gimbal and yelled, "Oh my God, you guys! A surgeon's getting taken by the FBI right here at Portland General. Share this now." At that very moment, Coin Channel 6 happened to be in the lobby for an unrelated organ donation interview. When Mason was led past, the camera only had to pivot slightly. They barely had time to react before the scene outstripped any news script. The lens swung toward Mason. Camera lights blasted across his face. A reporter's voice cut through the chaos. "Doctor." Carter, are you involved in accusations of intentional harm to a patient? Mason panicked, twisting toward the camera, shouting like a drowning man, reaching for his last breath. It was routine medication, but the moment the words left his mouth, the entire lobby burst into laughter. Derisive, not amused. The kind of laughter from people who have already seen the truth and owe respect to no one. An older nurse pressed her lips together. What medication needs sneaking around at 2 a.m.? With no label, no order? A man beside me murmured, loud enough for a live stream mic to catch. Poor woman. Worse is, she was married to him. Another patient pointed. That's a doctor. I'd rather stitch my own wound than let him touch me. Mason writhed, trying to jerk his arms, but the cuffs held tight. Two agents gripped his shoulders. Camera shutters, live stream audio, angry whispers. They blended into a sound no one could silence. The clip, recorded by dozens of phones, hit the internet within an hour and shot up the charts. Surgeon arrested in hospital lobby. Portland, general chaos. When the agents led Mason past where I stood, he saw me. His eyes filled with fear and hatred, but the arrogance was gone. I didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't mock him. I simply looked at him the way one looks at a verdict already stamped. An agent opened the door of the black SUV, pushed Mason's head down, and guided him inside. The door slammed shut, heavy, cold. At the far end of the hall, two doctors who once worked beside him stood with arms crossed, turning their faces away. No farewell, no sympathy, only the unified turning of backs by people who once called him colleague. Mason Carter left Portland General in handcuffs, and his reputation died right there in the hospital lobby before hundreds of witnesses and thousands watching online. And I stood there like a stone in a river, not joyful, not triumphant, only thinking, my daughter finally has people standing on her side. The federal trial took place in courtroom 7 of the Oregon District Court, while the family court hearing for Mia's custody was held in courtroom 3. 2 different rooms, 2 different judges, 2 different legal systems, but only one man was dragged into the light, Mason Carter. That morning, Portland's sky was still gray. I walked into the federal courtroom where the gallery was packed. FBI agents, reporters, hospital staff, and curious residents who had followed the story since the viral handcuff video in the hospital lobby. Mason was brought in, wrists uncuffed, but flanked on both sides by 2 U.S. Marshals. His face was gaunt, eyes bruised, the perfectly styled hair now greasy from nights without sleep. He looked around. No one looked back with sympathy. The trial began. The federal prosecutor stood, opened her laptop, and connected it to the large screen at the front of the room. Her first witness, Nurse Veronica Hale. She stood straight, voice crisp. I saw Dr. Carter enter the ICU at 2:23 a.m. with an unlabeled syringe requesting to administer anti-swelling medication, but the pharm tech confirmed no such medication had been ordered. Mason's lawyer jumped in. Objection. Speculative. The judge responded instantly. Overruled. The witness is recounting events. Next was charge nurse Elena. I pulled a camera snapshot through internal request. It shows Dr. Carter holding the syringe as he exited the ICU room at a time with no medical order. The courtroom murmured like a wave. The third witness, Dr. Beatrice Kim. People practically sat up straighter when she entered. I confirm, $410,000 withdrawn unlawfully, 14 calls to Cascadia Life. EMR privileges elevated without authorization at 2:13 a.m. A fake pending DNR uploaded from a Newport Marina IP. Based on the withdrawal pattern, split transfers designed to evade reporting. I no longer consider this personal spending. It resembles the structure of a financial crime plan, coordinated, not accidental. When it was Navarro's turn, he presented the yacht photo metadata on the screen before the jury. Alyssa in a tiny bikini. Mason smiling with a champagne glass. The text at the corner, sliced like a blade. iCloud metadata. 4:22 p.m. 19 minutes after Lauren's emergency surgery began. Mason lowered his head, couldn't look. The jury stared at him like a pathology without a name. Then came the family court hearing. Smaller room, fewer cameras, but just as heavy. Janet Crowley placed a thick packet before the judge. Your Honor, we present a 3-stage model of Mason Carter's deliberate attempt to push his wife toward death. The judge raised an eyebrow. 3 stages? Janet nodded. Stage 1. Brake sabotage. Forensic mechanic confirms brake lines cut with surgical tools. Stage 2. Preparing a fake DNR. EMR logs confirm. Stage 3. Execution. Syringe containing KCl discovered in the ICU at 2:23 a.m. under Dr. Carter's possession. The room fell silent. The judge looked at Mason. Mr. Carter, do you have anything to say? Mason stammered meaningless fragments. No one believed him. No one saw him as a doctor anymore. Janet delivered the final strike. If the court does not intervene, he will continue to cause harm, not only to Lauren, but to the child, Mia. The judge set her pen down. The gavel fell. The sound was the end of a verdict that had been building for weeks, months, years. The court hereby suspends all parental rights of Mason Carter. Full and permanent guardianship of Mia Callahan is granted to Mr. Henry Callahan. For a rare moment, Mason had no words. Pale, crushed, eyes hollow of a man who had just lost the last thing he could control. The federal court proceeded with temporary sentencing, and the prosecutor closed with the defendant's actions represent a combination of greed, deceit, and a level of cruelty unacceptable in any civilized society. And I, when invited to speak, said only one sentence: calm, steady, neither anger nor vengeance. I am not seeking revenge. I am protecting my family. 2 courts, 2 rulings, but both ending the same path. Mason Carter stripped bare before the law, before the community, and before the weight of his own crimes. That summer in Portland arrived slowly, as if the city itself needed time to recover from the suffocating months behind us. 4 months since the trial. 4 months since Mason was led out of the hospital lobby in handcuffs. 4 months of surviving on fragile hope and faint monitor signals. And then that morning, the 9th floor ICU room was filled with pale gold sunlight. I was sitting beside Lauren's bed, my hand on hers, as it had been for hundreds of days. Mia had fallen asleep on the chair, clutching her stuffed bear. I was exhausted, to the point my eyelids felt like iron. Yet I still heard every breath Lauren took. I whispered as I did every day. I'm here, sweetheart. H. And for the first time in months, Lauren's fingers moved. My heart slammed against my chest. I shot to my feet. Lauren, can you hear me? Her eyelids trembled. She tried to open her eyes, managing only a thin slit. Her lips moved soundless. It took a few more days for the first full dad to come out. Not fast, but enough for me to know I was no longer standing at the edge of despair. I choked on a sound decades on the bench never taught me to control. Mia bolted upright, rubbing her eyes before crying out, "Mom!" She ran to grip Lauren's hand. Nurse Veronica covered her mouth at the doorway, tears slipping before she could wipe them. The ICU physician cried openly like a child. Everything in that room, all the pain, the sleepless nights, the long months spent hovering between fear and faith, dissolved the moment Lauren looked at me with weak, blurry eyes and recognized me. Dad. Her voice was tiny, but to me, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. While Lauren began relearning how to breathe, swallow, sit up, the outside world continued its march toward justice. Mason Carter stood in federal court for the final time. Prosecutors recommended a combined sentence based on wire fraud, insurance fraud, computer tampering, obstruction, and attempted murder under Oregon law. The judge ruled the defendant, Mason Carter, is sentenced to a total of 32 years in federal prison, no parole for the first 24. I heard the verdict while standing in a hospital hallway. Not joyful, not triumphant. This wasn't the fall of a man. It was the price of every severed brake line, every fake DNR click, every unlabeled syringe placed beside my daughter's bed. Alyssa didn't escape either. She received 9 years for aiding insurance fraud and conspiracy, with 5 years of probation after release. A reporter asked, "Mr. Callahan, do you feel justice has been served?" I answered only, "Justice isn't revenge. Justice is the boundary every person must respect." 3 months later, Lauren was transferred to rehab. She could sit up, smile, say my name, and Mia's. And for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a blind, endless road. I founded the Lauren Foundation for Medical Ethics, a small but solid fund helping victims of medical fraud, EMR misuse, and intentional harm inside healthcare systems. Veronica became the first volunteer. Dr. Kim joined as a legal advisor. Eli contributed the security system against unauthorized access. Each of us patched a piece of what Mason had once shattered. The day Lauren was finally allowed outside, I pushed her wheelchair to the Willamette River. Portland was cool, sunlight glimmering on the water as if drawing a new horizon for the three of us. Mia held her mother's hand, and her other hand held mine. A soft breeze passed. I looked at the river, my daughter, and the small child leaning against my leg, and I whispered for myself alone, "Justice isn't revenge. It's a boundary." A boundary men like Mason tried to break, but that justice restored exactly where it belonged. Lauren rested her head on my shoulder. Mia leaned against her mother. 3 generations finally seated together beside a calm river after months of storms. And for the first time in a long time, I felt myself breathe fully. As I pushed Lauren's wheelchair away from the wheel, the sun slipped behind Portland's rooftops, leaving a thin gold thread across the water. The months of betrayal, darkness, and lies, none of it turned me into someone vindictive. It turned me into a father who knows exactly which boundaries are untouchable. And if I learned anything from this entire journey, it is this: silence is not weakness. Silence is a weapon when you hold the truth in your hands. Mason lost everything. Alyssa lost her freedom. Lauren is slowly reclaiming her life. Slow, painful, real. Mia now has a safer childhood. Not perfect, but no longer shadowed by fear. And I know I've guarded the boundary no one should have crossed in the first place. If you've ever watched someone disregard your boundaries, ever been pushed out of your own life, ever been labeled with words that crushed your breath, leave us single. So I know you're still here, still standing, still refusing to let pain define you. And if you want more stories about justice, about silence with weight, about people who seem broken but rose in ways the world couldn't ignore, hit subscribe so each week you have a reminder: justice doesn't come on its own. It comes when we rise for ourselves.